In the fog-choked coastal town of Mizushiro, where the sea whispered secrets and the streets seemed to twist under moonlight, Dr. Hiroshi Tanaka toiled in solitude. His laboratory, a crumbling warehouse at the edge of town, was a shrine to his obsession, a machine called the Vox Transmundi. It was a grotesque amalgamation of science and madness. Tangled tubes pulsed like veins, and dials glowed with an unnatural light that flickered in patterns no human eye could fully pass. Hiroshi, a gaunt man with eyes sunken from sleepless nights, believed it would bridge the gap to other dimensions, to truths beyond the veil of reality. The machine's completion came on a night when the fog was so thick it seemed to cling to the skin. Hiroshi's hands trembled as he tightened the final bolt, the air heavy with the scent of ozone and rusted metal. He flipped the switch, and the Vox Transmundi hummed to life, a low, guttural sound that vibrated through the floorboards and into his bones. The townsfolk, already wary of the reclusive scientist, complained of the noise, claiming it made their teeth ache and their dreams restless. Hiroshi dismissed their grievances. They couldn't understand the magnitude of his work. When he first activated the machine's communication array, the room darkened as if the light itself recoiled. Static crackled from the speakers, then resolved into a voice, or voices layered and discordant like a choir of drowned souls. "Hiroshi Tanaka," they hissed, though he had never spoken his name. "What do you seek?" His heart raced. This was it, the threshold of the unknown. He asked about the stars, the origins of existence, and the voices answered with fragments of knowledge, glimpses of galaxies spiraling into nothingness, equations that made his mind ache with their implications. But then came the demand, "Give us something of yours, something cherished." Hiroshi hesitated, his fingers brushing the pocket where he kept his late father's pocket watch, its face etched with a faint spiral from years of nervous rubbing. The voices grew insistent, their tone shifting to a low, predatory hum. Reluctantly, he placed the watch on the machine's altar-like platform, a slab of cold metal that seemed to absorb the offering. The Vox Transmundi flared, its lights pulsing in a rhythm that felt alive, and a new equation appeared on the cracked monitor, a formula that bent the light in the room, casting shadows that writhed like worms. That night, Hiroshi felt a hollowness he couldn't explain, as if the watch had taken a piece of him with it. He tried to focus on the equation, scribbling it feverishly, but the numbers seemed to shift on the page, forming spirals that vanished when stared at directly. He shook it off as exhaustion, but the laboratory felt different now. The walls, stained with salt and time, bore faint patterns, spirals again, etched so lightly they might have been tricks of the light. He blinked, and they were gone. Outside, Mizushiro stirred uneasily. A fisherman, Taro, lingered near the warehouse, drawn by rumors of strange lights. Peering through a grimy window, he glimpsed the Vox Transmundi and froze. The machine's tubes seemed to twist toward him, and for a moment he swore he saw eyes in the shadows, countless, unblinking, staring through him. He stumbled back, screaming, and fled into the fog. By morning, the town whispered of Taro's ravings, calling Hiroshi a madman, a bringer of curses. Hiroshi ignored them, consumed by the voices. Each night he returned to the machine, asking more questions, receiving more answers, each one heavier than the last. The Vox Transmundi never slept. Its hum grew louder, seeping into the town, a sound that made dogs whimper and children wake, crying. Hiroshi's notes piled up, filled with cryptic symbols and half-remembered truths. He felt the machine watching him, its lights flickering like a heartbeat. And in the corners of his vision, the spirals returned, now lingering longer, curling in the air like smoke. He told himself it was progress, that he was on the cusp of something monumental. But deep down, a question gnawed at him. What would the voices ask for next? Dr. Hiroshi Tanaka no longer recognized the rhythm of day and night. In the dim, flickering light of his laboratory, the Vox Transmundi had become his world, its hum a constant pulse that drowned out the crashing waves of Mizushiro's coast. The voices from the machine grew clearer, their words weaving tapestries of forbidden knowledge, secrets of time's elasticity, of dimensions folded like origami beyond human perception. But each revelation came at a steeper cost. The entities, their voices now a chorus of grinding static and whispers that seemed to claw at his mind, demanded more than trinkets. They wanted pieces of Hiroshi himself. The first demand was a memory. "Give us a moment that shaped you," they hissed, their tone both seductive and menacing. Hiroshi, entranced by the promise of glimpsing the past, chose the memory of his first love, a fleeting summer with a girl whose face he could still trace in his dreams. He spoke her name into the machine, and the Vox Transmundi shuddered, its tubes glowing with a sickly green light. In return, it projected visions, Mizushiro's harbor as it was centuries ago, ships swallowed by a sea that pulsed with unnatural life, their masts twisting into spirals. The vision was intoxicating, but when it faded, Hiroshi felt a void. He tried to recall her face, her laugh, but found only a blank space, as if she had never existed. His hunger for answers grew ravenous. The machine's promises of truths about life's origins, of power over reality itself, kept him tethered to its altar. But Mizushiro was changing. Townsfolk reported nightmares of endless spirals, waking to find faint, writhing patterns on their skin, like veins pulsing beneath. A baker's wife swore she saw her reflection blink independently, its eyes spiraling inward. Hiroshi dismissed these as hysteria, but he couldn't ignore the machine's behavior. Even when unplugged, it hummed, its lights casting shadows that moved against the laws of physics. At night, he heard its whispers in his dreams, urging him to ask more, to give more. The townsfolk's unease turned to anger. A group led by Taro, the fisherman who had glimpsed the machine's horrors, stormed the laboratory, demanding Hiroshi destroy his creation. Their eyes glinted oddly, reflecting the same spiral patterns he'd seen on his walls. "You're cursing us!" Taro shouted, his voice cracking with fear. Hiroshi, hollow-eyed and trembling, drove them out, clutching a wrench like a talisman. But their words lingered, and he noticed the spirals were no longer fleeting. They etched themselves deeper into the walls, curling like living things. The entity's next demand was a living sacrifice, something with a heartbeat, they intoned, and Hiroshi's stomach churned. His old cat, Cage, had been his only companion in the laboratory, curling up beside the machine's warmth. He hesitated, stroking Cage's fur, but the voices grew shrill, their static cutting into his thoughts like glass. With shaking hands, he placed Cage on the altar. The machine roared, the floor trembling as if the earth itself recoiled. In return, it offered a fragment of knowledge so profound it made Hiroshi weep, a glimpse of life's first spark, born in a void where stars screamed. But when he looked for Keiji, the altar was empty, save for a faint spiral burned into the metal. That night, Hiroshi saw himself in the mirror, or something like himself. His reflection's eyes were wrong, too many, spiraling into depths that made his head spin. He stumbled back, heart pounding, and the machine's hum seemed to laugh. The town grew quieter, its people avoiding the streets, their faces marked by spirals that moved like worms under their skin. Hiroshi knew he should stop, but the Vox Transmundi called to him, its lights pulsing in time with his heartbeat. The entities whispered of one final truth, one final price. And in the silence of Mizushiro's fog, Hiroshi felt the weight of what they might ask next. Dr. Hiroshi Tanaka was a husk of himself, his eyes bloodshot and ringed with spirals that seemed to pulse beneath his skin. The Vox Transmundi had become his master, its hum a relentless heartbeat that drowned out reason. Mizushiro lay under, a suffocating fog, the town's streets eerily silent save for the machine's drone, which now echoed in every corner. The entity's latest demand was unthinkable, a sacrifice so profound Hiroshi refused to name it, even in his thoughts. It was a line he could not cross. In a moment of clarity, or perhaps desperation, he seized a crowbar and swung at the machine, determined to end its hold. The metal sparked, but the Vox Transmundi pulsed defiantly, its tubes writhing like serpents, and Hiroshi froze as the air grew thick with a pressure that crushed his lungs. A crack split the laboratory's air, a tear in reality itself. The Vox Transmundi screamed, and a portal yawned open, a jagged wound exuding a black, viscous liquid that defied gravity, floating upward in spiraling tendrils. From the void emerged the entities, forms that mocked comprehension, their bodies a chaos of angles that bent impossibly, limbs folding into themselves, eyes, too many, too alive, staring with a hunger older than time. Their presence warped the room. The walls melted into spirals, and the floor buckled into a Mobius strip of stone and shadow. Hiroshi fell to his knees, clutching his head as their voices, now a cacophony of shrieks, filled his mind. "You opened the door! Now you belong to us!" Mizushiro unraveled. Townsfolk, drawn by an unseen force, shuffled toward the laboratory like moths to a flame. Their faces, etched with spiraling patterns that writhed like living tattoos, bore expressions of ecstasy and terror. Taro, the fisherman, led the procession, his eyes replaced by spiraling voids that leaked black ooze. Some collapsed, their bodies contorting into shapes that mimicked the entity's impossible geometries. Others laughed, their voices blending, with the machine's hum, forming a chorus that shook the sky. The fog thickened, and spirals bloomed across the town, on walls, in windows, etched into the very air. Hiroshi tried to flee, but the streets twisted, looping back to the laboratory. In defiance of logic, the portal was growing, its edges fraying reality like torn fabric. Buildings bent inward, their roofs curling into spirals that reached for a sky now studded with unblinking eyes. The entities spoke, their words cutting through Hiroshi's soul. "This world was never yours. The door opens both ways." He realized the truth. They hadn't come to invade. They were here to take humanity to their domain, a place of eternal, spiraling torment where existence was a scream without end. In a final act of defiance, Hiroshi lunged at the Vox Transmundi, now a pulsating mass of metal and flesh, but the machine enveloped him, its tubes coiling around his limbs, fusing him to its core. His screams became part of its hum, and his body twisted, his bones reshaping into spirals that glowed with sickly light. Mizushiro vanished into the fog, swallowed by the portal's maw. The few who escaped, fleeing to distant towns, spoke of a sky filled with eyes and a sound that followed them, a low, relentless hum. Days later, in a neighboring city, a junkyard, workers stumbled upon a strange device, its tubes faintly pulsing, its dials etched with spirals. He switched it on, and a voice whispered his name. Somewhere, in a place beyond time, Hiroshi's consciousness lingered, trapped in a spiral of endless eyes screaming into a void that answered back.